You are now the hunted. He has found his next candidate. And you understand, in a wave of ice-cold dread, that Ulf's story isn't over. It's just beginning again. By the guttering light of a single salvaged candle, you creep back into the infirmary. The logbook, the detailed record of every illness and injury treated within these walls, is miraculously intact. Your hand shakes, not from the memory of the raid, but from a terrifying revelation. You dip your quill. The sound it makes is a wet, deliberate scratch against the vellum, a secret being etched into history. You don't write of demons. You don't write of godless heathens. You write what you saw. Afflicted men, you write, with uncontrollable tremors, clouded eyes, and an unsteady gait. It's the discovery that a beloved, mass-produced food, the one on every table and in every child's lunch, is riddled with carcinogens. It's the quiet, horrifying collusion between the ones who produce it and the ones who govern, all agreeing that the truth is too expensive. To admit the poison is to admit economic collapse, to admit starvation. And so, the lie is served on a platter, and everyone agrees to call it nourishment. You notice it over the next few seasons. It's not the sudden madness of the ergot. It's a slow, quiet fading. He holds a femur in his hand, a bone that should be heavy, solid, but it feels unnervously light, like pumice stone. He taps it, and the sound is hollow, dead. He knows what he's seeing is not hunger. It is a plague of the very essence of life. His journal, filled with these forbidden thoughts, was later deemed unprofessional speculation and locked away by the institution that funded him. It's the same old story, a pattern that repeats through the ages. What they don't want you to know is that the constant state of warfare is a sophisticated form of social control, and the enemy isn't some foreign king. The enemy is standing right behind you, wearing a fine cloak and a heavy gold armring. You watch your cousin, Eric, his shoulders slumped, his cough a quiet, rattling thing he tries to hide in his fist. He was chosen for this voyage. So was Olin, who asks too many questions, and Finn, whose father died of the lung rot last winter and who has the same pale, sweaty look about him. Without the lie of glory, the Viking world would collapse into cannibalistic madness. History, you realize, is not a record of what happened. It is a weapon of control. It is the story the survivors must tell themselves to keep going. The Jarl looks at you, a boy who knows the terrible truth. Now you have a choice, Bjorn, he says. You can scream the truth and watch our world die. Or you can pick up a sword, get on a boat, and help us sell the lie. The downplaying of nuclear fallout. The classification of documents showing what industrial chemicals do to our bodies. They create a story of progress, of strength, of necessity, while the sickness seeps into the soil, the water, and our bones. They tell you not to worry, that the scraping sound in the cellar is just rats. They lied about a past built on a mountain of bones they deliberately mislabeled. So the only question left is, what else are they lying about right now? As you lie on your straw mattress, listening to the wind howl outside, you realize the chilling truth. They aren't just covering up a sickness. They are hunting for loose ends. Then you hear it, the soft scrape of a leather boot on the dirt, just outside your door. It is not the sound of a neighbor. It is the sound of someone trying not to be heard. You hold your breath, and the only sound you can hear is the frantic drumming of your own heart. You are no longer just the keeper of their secret. His eyes, cold and appraising, scan the faces of the warriors watching the spectacle. He is looking for his next weapon, his next sacrifice. His eyes pass over you, and for a terrifying second, you feel exposed, wondering if the fear you feel looks like a symptom to him. Then, his gaze lands on Bjorn, standing right beside you. Good, solid Bjorn. You remember last week, he couldn't recall the name of his own dog. You saw his hand tremble when he tried to lift his ale horn. The Jarl's lips curl into the barest hint of a smile. Another stumbles as he walks across the stone floor, his gait as unsteady as a drunkard's, though you know they haven't touched the monastery's wine. You see their eyes. 99% of people imagine the cold, clear eyes of a predator. But these are clouded, like milk poured into still water, unfocused and distant even in the heat of slaughter. They are not just barbarians, they are afflicted. Later, when the tide has pulled the dragon ships back into the mists, you are left in the ruin. The air smells of blood and smoke. From a special cask, he pulls not the common cod, but a delicacy. A preserved seabird, small and dark, slick with the oil that has kept it from rotting. He offers it with a nod. This is an honor, a food for warriors, a reward for your loyalty. To refuse is an insult worse than drawing a blade. You take it. The meat is rich, intensely savory, a welcome shock of flavor after the blandness of the rye. It tastes of victory. This is the medieval version of a secret you now live with every day. What the lead archaeologist wrote in his private, unpublished journal tells a different story. You can almost see him, a man of science, sitting alone in a canvas tent as a gas lamp sputters. The scratching sound of his pen on the page, the only thing louder than the howling wind. He writes not with the detached language of a scholar, but with the haunted urgency of a witness. The deformations, he writes, are unlike any known disease. They resemble a spongiform decay, a hollowing out. It is almost as if the marrow was eaten from within. The Jarl told you this was for honor. The skald's voice still rings in your ears from last night's fire, a deep-chested song of foreign silver and God's given glory. You stand on the shore, the cold North Sea wind biting at your cheeks, and you watch the longship slide into the gray water. It looks like a beast of legend, its dragon-head prow sniffing the horizon for Christian gold. But the story feels thin today, as thin as the broth you had for breakfast. The truth is a shard of ice in your gut. The sagas say it was a thirst for fame. Both are lies. It is an exodus. They are not sailing toward glory. They are running from a plague they created. Every raid is a desperate gamble, a search for new lands, new bloodlines, new magic, anything to outrun the creeping horror that they brought home in their own skulls. The sagas, the stories of Odin and Valhalla, they are propaganda, masterpieces of public relations designed to convince generations of young men to get on the boats, to keep the desperate search alive. They buried the evidence to frame the Northmen as demonic brutes, a far more useful story than a people dying from a disease nobody understood. Every saga, every runestone became an instrument in the greatest lie of the Dark Ages. What they buried was the most dangerous secret of all, that our leaders, both then and now, will sacrifice our health, our future, and the truth itself to protect their power. 99% of history has been sanitized this way. The playbook is the same. the decades-long suppression of climate change data by those who profit from the poison, the knowledge of the silent shores, the tremors in the hands of the powerful, the lie that everyone in your village lives by. You look at your neighbors, at the priest, at the Jarl's guards as they ride through the market, and you see the world through the eyes of the dead. Everyone is sleeping, and you are awake. You carry their ghosts inside you. You are the last echo of their defiant stand. But as the nights grow colder, a new fear takes root. They silenced 3. How many people knew about that secret meeting in the barn? They are the sounds of a young man's mind being eaten alive. But here is the secret within the secret, the truth even the Jarl may not fully grasp. The stew isn't just ritual. You've seen the shaman collecting mushrooms by the black bog, the ones everyone knows cause madness and visions. They aren't just exploiting the disease, they are feeding it, pushing the afflicted over the edge with psychoactive poisons to ensure their rage is spectacular enough for the battlefield, to ensure they burn out faster. The Jarl, satisfied, turns his gaze away from the cage, and through a crack in the weathered oak, you see them, the raiders. But something is wrong. They are not the giants of legend, the demonic forces the abbot preaches about. Yes, they are brutal, their arms thick with muscle, their beards matted with sweat and sea salt. But there's something else. You watch one of them, a man with a wild red mane, as he raises his axe. His hand trembles, an uncontrollable tremor that has nothing to do with rage or cold. In the damp hold of the ship, a creeping purplish-black fungus called ergot has bloomed on the grain. It's a toxin, a poison that seeps into your very nerves. The hallucinations, the seizures, the uncontrollable rage, it's not a spiritual gift. It's a neurological disease served at every meal. The famed Viking fury that strikes terror into the hearts of coastal monasteries is, in part, a mass poisoning event. But that is only the first secret, the one they hide in plain sight. There is a deeper one. The Jarl, his face a mask carved from sea-strafed wood, calls you over. But in the 1970s, on the wind-battered Isle of Man, a team of archaeologists found something that should have rewritten every book. A Viking mass grave. The official report, the one you can find in any university library, is clinical, sterile, and safe. It speaks of unusual bone porosity, of advanced joint decay in men who died young. The conclusion is simple, palatable: malnutrition, rickets, the hard life of a raider. A neat and tidy explanation that preserves the myth. But they sealed the truth in a dusty archive. The true horror begins to dawn on you, a fear colder than the northern sea. What if the Draugr aren't the curse? What if they are what you become when you fail? Weary, like a man who has carried a secret so heavy it has compressed his soul. You see now, he says, his voice a low rumble, you see the glory we trade for. He tells you everything, the sickness. He calls it the silent eater. It came from the birds, a ritual gone wrong. A prion disease, a concept your age has no word for, that turns the brain to sponge. It lies dormant for years, then it awakens. This is the truth behind the Viking expansion. 99% of people believe it was a population boom. It was a prion disease, a fire in the brain, likely contracted from infected sea mammals or strange game from a new world they stumbled upon and fled in terror. The berserkers, with their frothing mouths and inhuman strength, they weren't touched by Odin. They were the first victims, weaponized by their own leaders. A neurological epidemic turned into a holy war. The Jarls knew. They suppressed the truth to stop a panic, to maintain power, to turn sickly refugees into a conquering army. The church knew. One crushed by his own livelihood, one consumed by the forest. This is what they don't want you to know. This isn't a tragedy, it's a tactic. It's the medieval blueprint for silencing those who see too much. A pattern of convenient accidents and sudden disappearances that echoes through the centuries, from forgotten sagas to the redacted files of modern intelligence agencies. It is the art of making the truth disappear along with the truth teller. And now, the weight of their words, their final, fatal secret, rests on you. This, you realize, is the horrifying parallel that will echo for 1,000 years. It's how military institutions will one day take the shattered minds of soldiers, men haunted by explosions and death, and call their trauma shell shock or battle fatigue. They will turn a debilitating injury of the soul into a mark of stoicism, a quiet badge of honor that hides the true, screaming human cost. The Jarl is doing it right here, right now, rebranding a terminal neurological disease as divine possession. The roars from the cage are not the sound of a god awakening. This is the end of the world. What happens next is exactly what the histories tell you. The screaming begins. The great wooden doors of the priory splinter under heavy axes. You see brothers you have known your whole life cut down where they stand, their sacred texts thrown into the mud and trampled. The metallic taste of fear floods your mouth, so thick you can barely swallow. You scramble for cover in the infirmary, wedging yourself behind a row of clay pots filled with yarrow and comfrey, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. At the edge of your vision, the waves seem to form faces, whispering promises and curses that dissolve into foam. You see another man, a veteran of a dozen voyages, staring intently at his own hands as if they are alien things. The elders say this is the gods speaking, that the veil thins on the open water. They say the twitching is the prelude to the battle fury, the famed berserker rage. But 99% of people, now and then, will never learn the truth. It isn't the gods, it's the rye. Each drop makes a soft pat against the sodden wool of your tunic, a sound like a tiny, insistent finger tapping on your shoulder. You stare at the ground, at the dark, rich soil that has swallowed generations. You wonder what secrets it holds, what truths are buried just inches beneath the worn leather of your shoes. 99% of people believe the sagas, the stories of Vikings as giants, healthy, robust, bursting with a life force that conquered the known world. For centuries, this has been the accepted history. The wet creak of the hull timbers sounds like a moan. The men on deck are sharpening their axes, dreaming of plunder. They don't know the truth. They don't know that the treasure you seek isn't gold, but a clean bill of health for your people. And they don't know that the walking dead aren't a monster you fight with an axe. They're a symptom of the disease you were sent to cure. The wind howls outside, and you are sailing directly into the heart of the quarantine. Into the land that was supposed to be erased. It's Eric, but his eyes are vacant, his movements jerky, inhuman. He's thin as a famine victim, his skin scarred with self-inflicted wounds. This isn't a warrior. This is a monument to a lie. And as his head snaps toward you, you see not recognition, but the terrifying, simple hunger of an animal. You hear a footstep on the stairs behind you. You are not alone. You've been caught. The Jarl stands on the steps, his face carved from shadow and torchlight. He doesn't look angry. He looks tired. The Viking who hated the sea. You were told he was a coward. That is the story they wrote on his bones. But what they don't want you to know is that cowards don't survive. Prophets do. He was the sole survivor of a cover-up that has poisoned history for 1,000 years. The Great Viking expansion wasn't about glory. It was a desperate, panicked plague flight. The mindworm you heard whispered about in the Longhouse wasn't a myth. But as you stand there, staring at the rubble, you can taste the metallic tang of fear and soot on your tongue. You know that beam was sound. This is not the work of chance. It's the work of physics, applied with malice. Eric is the cruelest. He simply disappears. His sister, her eyes wide with a terror she cannot voice, tells everyone he wandered into the woods, his mind finally broken by grief. They organize a search party that finds nothing but trampled leaves. He is a ghost, a warning. 3 men knew, 1 drowned in a phantom storm. They weaponized the symptoms and gave a death sentence a glorious name. The sound from the cage changes. It's no longer a roar. It's a wet, desperate gurgle, the sound of a man trying to scream through a throat raw with it. Ulf begins to slam his head methodically against the bars, a dull, rhythmic thudding that feels like a drumbeat for a funeral. This is the moment the shaman has been waiting for. He approaches the cage, unlatching the small door, just wide enough to shove the bowl of stinking mash inside. The air is cold, pure, filled with the cry of gulls and the bleating of sheep. Your world is one of stone, parchment, and the rhythmic chant of vespers that has marked every day of your adult life. Then you see them. At first, they're just splinters on the horizon, dark shapes cutting through the gray North Sea. But they grow. The splinters become ships, long and menacing, with carved dragon heads that seem to drink the fog. You've heard the whispers, the sailors, tales of Northmen, but tales are for the fire. This is real. When the hunger gnaws, you reach into the sack. Inside is the rye hardtack. It's less bread than a slab of baked grit, designed not for pleasure, but for survival. You hear the gritty crunch of your own teeth grinding against the hard biscuit, the sound loud in the skull silence of the open sea. It tastes of earth and time, and something else, something you don't have a name for. Later, during your watch under a sky smeared with faint, cold stars, it begins. A tingling in your fingertips, a slight, involuntary twitch in the muscle of your jaw. The official story is a lie. The bones do not lie, but the men who write the reports do. What they don't want you to know is that the earth remembers everything, and sometimes it whispers its secrets to those who are willing to listen. You stand at the edge of the village, where the last wattle and daub hovel gives way to the grasping mud of the fallow field. A cold, thin rain is falling, the kind that doesn't wash anything clean, but simply makes the world wetter, heavier. The hidden truth is that you were sent to the empty, desolate ones on purpose. Your Jarl, his own daughter fading in his hall, was desperate to find a pure world, a new beginning. Instead, his explorers found the source of the sickness. They found its nest. They found where the Draugr were born. The map in your hands is a silent testament to that failure, a secret so dark it had to be erased from history itself. It feels impossibly cold now, a carrier of the contagion it depicts. Runa tells you they keep Eric in the cellar, not just to hide him, but to protect the village from him. She gives you a key. See for yourself, she weeps. See what glory really looks like. That night, you slip back to the Jarl's longhouse. The key turns with a deafening click. You descend into the suffocating dark, a single tallow lamp pushing back the gloom. The smell is overwhelming. You hear it before you see it. The thick, wet sound of labored breathing, a lung trying to work through fluid. And then your lamp finds him. 99% of the world thinks the Viking Age ended with battles and kings. They never learned the epidemiological smoking gun buried in that Newfoundland soil. You didn't just abandon a settlement. You carried a neurological plague back to Greenland, a ticking time bomb that would unravel your people from the inside out. The curse wasn't left behind in Vinland. It was just getting started. A sudden squall, they say, on a night you remember as being dead calm. The stars so bright they looked like holes punched in a black sky. They find his boat splintered, his body washed into the reeds, face down in the cold, dark water. An accident. 2 weeks later, a scream rips through the dawn. Gunnar's forge has collapsed. A main beam, a piece of oak as thick as your thigh, that Gunnar himself had blessed for its strength, has inexplicably shattered. The official story is a smithing accident, a flaw in the timber, a sickness, a pestilence of the mind they call the mind worm, sometimes takes root in the young and the strong. In its early stages, before it paralyzes and kills, it causes violent aggression, unpredictable mania, and a terrifying inability to register pain. So they built a myth around a plague. They didn't search for the strongest warriors to bless. They watched for the first signs of the sickness, the tremors, the memory lapses, the sudden, unprovoked rages. Then, for 800 years, one page of a monastery's medical records was sealed by the church. The secret it contained was so dangerous to their version of history that they tore it from its binding and locked it away, hoping the ink would fade to dust and the truth along with it. But it didn't. When the page was finally found and translated, it revealed the single greatest cover-up of the medieval world. The salt spray tastes of prayer on your lips. You stand on the holy island of Lindisfarne in the year 793. You are on the open water. The salt spray is a constant ghost on your skin, crusting in your beard and hair. Your world is the creak and groan of the longship's timbers, a living beast beneath you, its wooden ribs flexing with every swell of the gray, indifferent ocean. The oar in your hands is worn smooth, shaped by the calluses of men who came before you, and now by your own. Your muscles burn, a deep, satisfying ache that speaks of purpose. This is the Viking way, to endure, to conquer. But as she looks at you, you see another flicker of something in her gaze, something deeper and more unsettling than just pity. It's a chilling focus, a purpose. It makes a cold question rise in your throat. What if the mind worm isn't always an accident of war? What if, in the right hands, it's a weapon? And the healer isn't just ending suffering, she's erasing the evidence. This is the secret that shatters every heroic tale. These cursed lands were real, visited places, but they were quarantined. This map isn't a guide, it's a warning. Why would a culture built on discovery forbid access to new territory? The answer is the same reason a modern government might classify a file on an environmental catastrophe or a strange signal from deep space. It's not to prevent mass panic, it's to control the narrative. It's to protect the powerful from the damning accountability of failure. The official story is that Vikings only targeted wealthy, populated lands. She reveals something historians have hidden for centuries. The Vikings didn't just raid. They engaged in ritualistic practices to absorb the power of their enemies. In a far southern land, they were taught a new ritual for courage, consuming the brains of these birds to gain their swiftness. But the birds were sick, and the sickness passed to them. Now you understand the scraping, the moans. It's a disease of the mind, one that hollows out a man until only instinct remains. It's not a lie. The monsters are real, but they are not in the woods. They are on this ship with you. They are in the man beside you, whose laughter now sounds like breaking glass. They are in the man at the oars, who has forgotten his own name. And the most terrifying secret of all, a cold stone in your gut, is that they might be inside you too. The sea isn't the enemy anymore, it's the highway. Every league your ship sails, every wave that crashes over the bow, is bringing the poison home. It is something being brought here, something being hidden by the most powerful man in the lands. They agree, their faces grim in the sliver of moonlight. The All-Thing, the Great Assembly, is their only chance. They will speak the truth before all the clans. They believe in the old laws, in the power of an honest voice. It is the last mistake they will ever make. You don't see Leaf again. The story comes back on the tide, whispered from fisherman to fisherman. He speaks of Odin's favor, of the bear spirit entering a mortal man, granting him strength beyond reckoning, a rage that feels no pain, a strategic weapon, a blessing. You watch the warriors around you nod, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. They see a god being born. You see a trap being sprung. 99% of people who tell the sagas of these shield-biting warriors never learn the secret you are starting to piece together in the shivering dark. The berserker state was never a choice. It was a symptom. The Jarl and his shaman discovered a horrifying truth. That night, when the moon is a splinter in the black sky, you hear a quiet, heavy splash near the stern. It is not loud, easily mistaken for a large wave. The next morning, the Jarl's son informs the crew that Kettle's spirit is calm now, and he is resting. But you count the men at the oars. There is one less. And when you try to catch the eye of the man next to you, he stares resolutely at the horizon, as if looking for a shore that will never, ever come. What they don't want you to know is that your strength is a lie. The story they tell you, the one whispered by the skalds around the longhouse fire, is that your power comes from the sea. It comes from the hard, salted cod that flakes between your teeth, and the fermented shark that burns your throat, but promises to keep you alive through the endless, sunless winter. But the deepest secret, the one buried under 1,000 years of saga and stone, is that your greatest strength is also your slowest, most intimate poison. A mercy so profound and so forbidden it must be done in secret, the body burned not in a glorious pyre on a ship, but in a quiet fire, the smoke mingling with the smell of shame and the fear of contagion. The healer finishes. She rises, her face a mask of stone in the moonlight. Her eyes find you in the darkness. They don't hold surprise or anger. They hold the terrible, crushing weight of a secret that, if spoken aloud, could shatter the warrior ethos that holds your entire society together. the one that steals the light from a child's eyes and turns a warrior's muscles to water. Your finger, calloused and cracked from salt and rope, traces a jagged fjord that doesn't exist in any official saga. And there, marked in a faded ink of rust and blood, is the rune. Not for treasure, not for a safe harbor. It is the chilling, angular shape that means Draugr, the walking dead. Your fingernail makes a faint, rasping sound as it scrapes over the dried symbol. A sound like dead leaves skittering across a gravestone. You approach her slowly, speaking of Eric's bravery, of his last raid. You mention the old mother's words, the souvenir from a distant land. At first, she denies everything. But then you say the word she's been holding inside like a poisoned stone. Sickness. Her composure shatters. Through tears, she confesses. Eric returned from the east a different man. Quieter, more agitated. And he brought back gifts, including a cage of exotic, brightly colored birds for the Jarl. An enemy that rides in on the pollen, that seeps into your lungs from the very soil of the land you came to conquer? This is a uniquely modern terror, the fear of the microscopic, the viral, the prion, and they were living it 1,000 years ago. You stand on the prow of the longship, turning your back on the green coast. You have made a decision. You will burn the maps. You will forbid any man from speaking the name of this land. You will call it cursed, a place of trolls and monsters, to scare anyone from ever returning. 99% of people in your village believe the official story because the alternative is a horror they cannot name. This intimate familial knowledge is the most dangerous kind. Finally, Gunnar the blacksmith, a man built of iron and certainty, slams his fist on a feed trough, and the cow in the nearest stall shifts with a nervous low. The Jarl's son, he growls, the words like hot coals. I was mending his saddle buckle. His hands, they have the tremor. The secret hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. It isn't a curse. It isn't a plague. His eyes, once the color of the summer sky, are now wide, frenzied pools of terror, reflecting the sputtering torchlight in a way that doesn't look human. The air is thick with the smell of pine resin from the torches, cold iron, and the uniquely foul stench of the stew in the shaman's bowl. A smell of rot and bitter herbs that coats the back of your throat. The Jarl stands beside the shaman, his face a mask of cold calculation. To the others, he is a leader performing a sacred rite. You look at the other warriors, at their hard faces and scarred hands, and you see them differently. They are not gods of the sea. They are fragile bags of flesh, afloat on a vast and indifferent trap. You look down at your own hands, gripping the wet wood of your oar. You flex your fingers, a sudden, desperate need to confirm that they still obey you. The Jarl's son sees you do it. A flicker of something cold and dangerous passes through his eyes. He knows you saw the truth. She is describing the end of your people, your family, your mind. And then she stops speaking. She fixes her gaze on you, her milky eyes like chips of flint in the firelight, and asks a question that stops your heart cold. Tell me, she rasps, her voice suddenly sharp as a shard of ice. Have you ever forgotten the name of someone you love? When our institutions, medical, religious, governmental, lay down rigid doctrines for how life must be lived and how it must end, they often ignore the brutal, intimate reality of suffering. The rules are written by people who are not trapped in the failing machine. Here, behind a Viking woodshed, you are witnessing the brutal collision of dogma and compassion. This isn't murder. This is mercy. What they don't want you to know is that the great Viking age of exploration was built on a terrible lie. 99% of people, then and now, believe it was a hunt for silver, for land, for fame. The truth, the secret that pulses from this cold map, is that the most daring voyages weren't for raiding at all. They were a desperate search for something else entirely. They were a cover for a grim experiment, a search for a land untouched by the creeping sickness, the one that leaves no sores, no fever, just a slow, gray wasting. She lives in shame, a ghost in her own home, pretending her husband is simply away. You find her by the shore, mending nets with fingers raw from the cold and the coarse twine. Her eyes are hollowed out by a grief she isn't allowed to show. Most people assume medieval marriages were simple transactions, but the emotional devastation of loss was just as real, just as raw. Imagine being told your partner has a terminal illness, but you have to pretend they're on a business trip for the good of the company. That is Runa's life. This is the secret that dies in the telling. The sagas, the grand stories of heroes, are a cover-up. They are quarantine documents disguised as epics. The Jarls didn't flee Vinland because of a few frightening encounters with the natives. That's the story you tell children. They fled because their warriors, the foundation of their entire culture, were losing their minds. They were becoming the monsters they used to hunt. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? Then Eric, his face a roadmap of grief, his hands twisting a leather cord until his knuckles are white. His voice breaks. He doesn't speak of God's will taking his wife and 2 sons. He describes how they faded, how the laughter left their eyes first, replaced by a deep, hollow confusion. He speaks of the shaking, the way his boy's hands could no longer hold a cup. The official story is that they wasted from a fever of the gut, but you hear the truth in the wet sound of his anguish. What they don't want you to know is that the berserker's roar wasn't a gift from the gods. It was the first scream of a dying brain. The man in the cage is named Ulf. He was your friend. He taught you how to fletch an arrow so it flew true. His hands steady and precise. Now those same hands are claws, the fingernails split and bloody from scraping against the rough-hewn bars of his cage. A stroke, a seizure, what we might now call a neurological event. To them, it was a curse, a sign of weakness from within, a rot in the soul that no amount of courage could fight. They drag him down into the cramped darkness below, and the rhythm of the oars resumes. But it's different now. It's a funeral dirge. The monster isn't in the gray depths beneath the hull. It has been on the ship with you all along, hiding in the blood and bone and sinew of the men you thought were invincible. The fearsome Viking, the stoic shield maiden, these are not characters in a story. They are people, just like you, watching their loved ones lose themselves piece by piece, their personalities erased by an invisible enemy coiled not around the world, but inside their own skulls. The terror is no longer mythic. It's medical. It's biological. It could be in your blood, your food, your family. The smoke stings your eyes, but it's not the smoke that makes them water. It's the chilling realization that she is not predicting the end of the world. A hero's end is meant to be loud, but Valhalla has no answer for the mindworm. The promise of an eternal feast feels like a cruel fantasy when faced with a man who can no longer remember how to chew. This quiet, desperate act of poisoning is a crack in the very foundation of your world. It is the terrifying admission that your faith is not always enough. It's a dark mirror, a truth we still wrestle with in our own time. It is a skin book, a book of skin, calf skin scraped impossibly thin and treated with fish oil until it feels slick and cold, almost alive. Every Viking navigator knows the coast of Francia, the shores of England. But this map shows a coastline that seems to shiver and retreat from the known world. The Jarl himself gave it to you, his eyes not filled with the fire of conquest, but with a deep, weary dread. This is the forbidden knowledge, the secret shared only between a Jarl and his most trusted, most expendable captains. It is a souvenir from a place we were never meant to go. This is the dark secret of interconnectedness, a truth we relearn with every pandemic. Your supply chain of glory has brought a plague to your door. The old mother holds out a small, carved bird. The man in the cellar, Eric, he carried a bird like this for luck on his last voyage. Find out where the bird came from. Then you will know what hunts you. Eric's bird. The clue burns in your mind. You know his wife, Runa. It doesn't start with a battle cry. It starts with a whisper. One of your best men, a raider who faced down Saxons without flinching, wakes up screaming about spiders crawling under his skin. You hear him late at night, his fingernails scraping his own arms raw, a dry, rasping sound that makes the dogs whine. Another man, your navigator, starts seeing patterns in the waves, claiming the sea is speaking a language only he can understand. He becomes paranoid, trusts no one, his eyes constantly darting to the shadows. It's a madness, a mind worm. He speaks of a voyage, years ago, to lands the Jarl had claimed, lands where the trees were too quiet and the shore was littered with the bones of seabirds. He talks of a sickness there, but not the Red Death, a sickness of the mind, a trembling that started in the hands and ended in a vacant, staring madness. He says the Jarl's ships still go there, bringing back something more than timber and furs. You can smell the cold sea on his clothes, a scent that will soon be his shroud. He knows that you know. He sees the dissent in your posture, the truth in your eyes. He holds up another arm ring, even more ornate than the last, and his gaze doesn't leave your face. It's not an offer, it's a threat. Will you step forward and accept the silver, becoming complicit in the deception? Or will you stand your ground, and in doing so, become the new convenient enemy right here at home? That was the terror of a prisoner trapped inside his own body. It's the same primal fear you feel when you see a sheep born with two heads or a tree struck by lightning. The terrifying realization that the world and the bodies that move through it can simply break without reason. What they don't want you to know is that the greatest Viking fear wasn't being slain in battle, but of being dishonored by a body that betrayed them. It's the same reason a modern intelligence agency might classify a devastating public health report under the guise of national security. Power depends on controlling the story, on managing fear. And the truth of the mindworm was too chaotic, too real to be controlled. You realize with a jolt that the acrid smoke of the burning herbs isn't to summon spirits. It's a desperate, primitive form of sterilization, an attempt to purify the air of a sickness she can't see but understands with terrifying clarity. This is the moment history shatters. You hear the faint, dry scrape of her fingernail against the fired clay as she gathers a dark, thick paste. It's a sound that promises an end to all sound, a paste of hemlock and nightshade. They told you these were poisons for captured enemies, a final insult. It was a lie. This poison is for their own. Everything you've ever been taught screams that this is a violation. A warrior's soul belongs to the battlefield, to the glorious, bloody moment of exchange where a life is traded for a place in Valhalla. The sagas sing of the Sunstone and the unwavering pole star. They never mention the maps that are meant to be burned. You are in the cramped, heaving belly of the longship, the lantern swinging with the ocean's violent rhythm. It casts shadows that writhe like serpents on the curved timbers, a dance of darkness and faint, flickering light. The air is a thick cocktail of wet wool, the stale sweat of 40 oarsmen, and the bitter, briny smell of the deep sea. Before you, laid out on a sea chest, is not a map of glory, but the loudest noise is always the one they are trying to hide. She tells you a secret that 99% of people, even now, fail to understand. The Vikings weren't isolated. Their ships, their legendary dragon prows, were instruments of the first globalized economy. They sailed to Constantinople, to the caliphates of the Middle East. They brought back silver, silks, and spices. And sickness, she adds, her voice dropping lower. They brought back things that grow in the dark, things that feast on the spirit before they claim the flesh. This is not a curse from the gods. This was Vinland. But it was the other thing they found, the thing they didn't talk about for years that changed everything. In the exact same layer of earth, under the microscope, they saw them. Spores, microscopic, alien, and belonging to a neurotoxic fungus that lives only in the tissues of a small burrowing mammal unique to this region. They didn't just find a new world, they found its poison. Imagine you are the Jarl, not the hero of a saga, but a man of flesh and blood, watching your dream of a new world rot from the inside out. 3 men knew the truth. In the thin light of a waning moon, they gathered in the scent of sour milk and damp hay, their voices low, conspiratorial whispers, swallowed by the great, breathing darkness of the barn. You are there, hidden in the loft, the rough-spun wool of your tunic scratching at your neck, each splinter in the floorboards a needle against your skin. First, Leaf speaks. His voice is a gravelly rasp, worn by salt spray and foreign winds. He doesn't talk of a curse from God, the story the priest tells every sun cycle. A young man, his face flushed with a fever of pride that you know is not just metaphorical, steps forward. The Jarl slides the heavy silver ring onto his forearm. You hear the faint, metallic shk as it passes over his leather bracer, the sound of a soul being purchased. The young man raises his arm, and the crowd chants his name. He has pledged his life to a beautiful lie. The Jarl's eyes scan the room, and for a heart-stopping second, they lock with yours. There is no triumph in them, only cold, hard calculation. As they haul him towards the small hatch leading below deck, the Jarl's son, a boy no older than you, but with eyes as old as stone, steps forward. He scans the crew, his gaze lingering on you. He has the sea madness, he announces, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. The waves have unsettled his mind. He'll be well again when we see land. Sea madness. A convenient name for the unspeakable. A blanket thrown over a mystery that chills them more than any enemy. But you saw Kettle's face. That wasn't madness. And here is the secret that changed everything. The church suppressed this knowledge because a random biological plague didn't fit their narrative. They needed sin, punishment and redemption. A disease that simply is, a mindless, protein-based horror, offers no room for God's judgment. It just offers a meaningless, terrifying end. The Jarls suppressed it for a simpler reason: weakness. How can you lead a band of feared warriors when you know their minds could unravel at any moment, that the strength of their lineage is threatened by a rot from within? Later, when the moon is a sliver of bone in the black sky, you see her lead Leif's wife and brother out the door, not towards the open fields where glory is celebrated, but behind the woodshed where refuse is burned. You follow, a shadow clinging to other shadows. The air is cold, sharp with the smell of pine and damp earth. There is no ceremony here, no chanting, just the desperate, ragged breathing of his wife. The healer kneels. For the first time, you see her open the tiny clay pot. You meet the Jarl's gaze across the deck, and he gives you a thin, knowing smile. And you realize the sickness isn't just in the water, or the food, or the gut. It's in the very purpose of this voyage. And you now carry a secret that could see you thrown to the waves long before any disease claims you. The Jarl's wife has a cold heart, little Bjorn, she says without turning. Her voice is a dry rustle, like autumn leaves skittering across stone. You stay silent. You can hear the soft, rhythmic scrape of her knife as she shaves slivers from a piece of bone. It's an ASMR quality sound that should be calming, but it sends a shiver down your spine. The powerful build their longhouses with loud voices and strong walls, she whispers, finally turning. Her face is a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes cloudy with cataracts, but sharp with an unnerving clarity. The long, grassy mounds are the ghosts of Norse longhouses. The forge, the peat walls, a piece of Greenland torn away and marooned in a new world. For decades, the story was simple. They came, they saw, they fought the local Skraelings, and they left. But 99% of people, even historians, are telling the wrong story. Beneath your feet, in the same stratum as a Viking-era spindle whorl, archaeologists found something impossible: butternut tree pollen, a species that never grew in Europe, that only existed here, in this new, cursed land the sagas whispered about. This was the proof. But you have. The formula is a clear memory. The feel of the crushed leaves is a ghost on your fingertips. The Jarl is 10 feet away, his gaze sweeping the room. And you know he is watching you, wondering if the lesson he beat into your back has taken root. The monk's silence cost him his life. Your silence might cost this boy his. It finds a foreign threat, an immigrant caravan, a trade war. It manufactures an enemy to foster unity through fear. The technology has evolved from torchlight to television screens, but the strategy is identical. The manipulation of your fear, your hope, your desire to believe in something simple and glorious. That is ancient. It is the dark magic of control. The Jarl finishes his speech with a roar, and the hall explodes with the sound of shields being beaten and horns being raised. The men's grins have vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed, superstitious dread. This is the moment they never carve into the runes. This is the truth that rots behind the heroic poems. 99% of what you've been told about these men is a lie of omission, because it leaves out this quiet, private horror. Two of the older men move with a grim, practiced efficiency. They don't speak. They grab Kettle by his arms. He doesn't resist. He can't take his eyes off the monstrous claw that was, a moment ago, his hand. What they buried, What historians have overlooked for 1,000 years is the truth that crawls under your skin as you listen. The vulva isn't prophesying. She is practicing a form of medicine so advanced for its time, it was indistinguishable from magic. She is listing, with chilling clinical precision, the stages of a prion disease. A creeping sickness, like mad cow or kuru, that eats away at the brain, turning memory into fog and muscle into jelly. A sickness spread not by spirits, but perhaps by their funeral rites, by their very way of life. It's what happens when a skull is cracked just so, when the spirit is rattled loose inside its bone cage. This is the secret they buried deepest, the truth that rots beneath the glorious sagas of battle. The greatest fear of a warrior isn't a Saxon axe splitting his shield. It isn't the cold shock of a spear in the gut. The most feared outcome, the one that is never sung about by the skalds, is surviving. It's coming home whole, only to have your mind unravel thread by thread until you become a ghost in your own skin. They've made their peace with the decay. You are new. The truth is still a live thing in your mind, writhing and terrible. You look out at the horizon, at the promise of a storm gathering in the distance. But the real storm isn't out there. It's here, in the cramped space between ribs, in the silent, churning darkness of your own body. The true enemy isn't the Saxon spear waiting on a foreign shore. It's the invisible army already colonizing you from within, and the man who knowingly led you into its embrace. She lives past the edge of the village, in a hut woven from willow branches and sealed with mud and moss, like a lump of earth that grew a door. The villagers fear her. They say she speaks with the dead and bargains with the spirits of the bog. What they don't tell you is that they visit her by moonlight, begging for cures the Jarl's medicine cannot provide. You find her stirring a pot over a smoldering fire. The air is thick with the smell of drying herbs, yarrow, sage, and something else, a root that smells of damp graves. For 50 years, they kept a secret about the Vikings in America. It wasn't about the maps, or the ships, or the day they first landed. It was about the soil. Because what they found buried in the dirt at Lanso Meadows didn't just rewrite history, it revealed the source of the curse. You are there, on the northernmost tip of Newfoundland. The wind has teeth. It bites through your woolens, carrying the iron-gray smell of the North Atlantic. This is the only place on the continent where the evidence is undeniable. You now carry a truth that could save lives, but sharing it means your own death. It shatters the simple assumption that people in your time wanted to heal the sick. The truth is, some needed them to stay sick. Power is a currency, and for many, disease was the mint. Now, as you sit by the longhouse fire, the smoke stinging your eyes, you watch the Jarl's youngest son. He's just a boy of 7, but his hand, as he reaches for a piece of bread, has a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. The shaman hasn't noticed yet. What they don't want you to know is that the method has never changed. It's the oldest play in the Book of Power, a playbook written 1,000 years ago. When a modern corporation's product is found to be toxic, they don't recall it. They hire scientists to produce conflicting data. They launch a multi-million-dollar PR campaign to talk about personal responsibility or lifestyle choices. They hand you a gleaming silver arm ring in the form of a glossy advertisement, a celebrity endorsement. When a government faces an economic crisis of its own making, it doesn't admit fault. The sound is almost too quiet to hear over the waves. A dry, horrifying scrape of his own fingernails digging into his hardened palm. He lowers his head. He stares at his own hand. He looks at it not as a part of himself, but as a venomous spider that has just landed on his arm. The expression that washes over his face is not pain. It is a pure, uncomprehending terror, so profound it feels like a physical cold seeping into your own bones. The blood freezes in your veins. She speaks of men who see shadows coiled in the corners of sunlit rooms, who cry out at night against terrors no one else can see, who look at their own children and ask for their names. To the Jarl, this is poetic nonsense, a woman's dark metaphor for the weakness of age. To the new Christian missionaries scribbling notes on parchment, this is clear evidence of demonic possession, a righteous punishment for clinging to the old gods. Both are wrong, fatally wrong. He came back a hero, but the hero is gone. His eyes, once sharp enough to spot a sail on the horizon, now stare at nothing. Sometimes he laughs, a high, thin sound that makes the children cry. Sometimes he weeps without tears. Mostly, he just shivers, his powerful body jerking with a life that isn't his own. The elders whisper of a curse, of a demon that followed him home across the sea. The healer knows better. She has a name for it. The mindworm. They too will speak of acceptable losses as poison bleeds into the rivers and smoke chokes the sky, rebranding sickness as the price of progress. The language changes, but the rot at the heart of power is eternal. The willingness to sacrifice the bodies of the many for the ambitions of the few. You taste fear on your tongue, a sharp, metallic tang that cuts through the salt. It's the taste of knowing a forbidden thing. The other men, the veterans, they carry the secret in the stoic set of their jaws and the hollows beneath their eyes. You stand up, brushing the dirt from your knees, your heart a frantic bird in your chest. You've just been warned, and in your time, a Jarl's warning is a promise. You can't unhear the truth. The Jarl's wife has drawn a line in the mud, and you know that to cross it is to risk everything. But to live with the lie is a slower kind of death. You need to find someone else who isn't blinded by the sagas. You need the old mother. And every time you look at your own hands, you wonder when they will forget how to hold a sword and only remember how to beat against a wall in the dark. The sound from the cellar isn't just the end of his story. It's the beginning of yours. A manageable disease requires transparency. A divine curse requires absolute obedience. It's the same reason a new, cheap, effective cure for a modern plague would be fought tooth and nail by those who profit from the expensive, lifelong treatments. It was never about the woman's health. It was about who controlled the solution. The Jarl's sentence was swift. You were flogged in the center of the village, a public spectacle to reinforce the shaman's authority. The monk was executed. They buried his secret with his body, or so they thought, but it lives in you. They tell you about axes and longships, but 99% of people never learn that the most powerful Viking weapon was a well-told lie. Power isn't about strength, it's about controlling what people fear. And right now, the Jarl is teaching a masterclass. He is redirecting the village's terror, aiming it away from his own failure to manage their food supply and toward an external enemy. He will send the strongest, including many who carry the first seeds of the sickness, off to die or return with plunder. Either way, the problem is solved for him. This is the life. Then it happens. He stops. not just his story, but his entire being. Mid-word, mid-laugh, the sentence hangs in the air, an orphan. The light in his eyes doesn't just dim, it's extinguished, leaving two blue-gray stones. His mouth hangs slightly open. A tremor begins in his right hand, the one resting on the gunwale. It's a faint vibration at first, a nervous flutter, but then it grows. His thick, calloused fingers begin to curl inward, slowly, inexorably, pulling themselves into a rigid claw. 99% of people who hear the sagas of the Northmen believe this is just another beast from their dark mythology. What they don't want you to know is that this wasn't a myth. It was a diagnosis. The vulva describes men you know. She speaks of Bjorn, the raider whose axe hand now shakes so violently he cannot lift a drinking horn. She describes Astrid, the weaver who one day looked at her own loom as if it were a strange cage of wood and string. Her life's work, forgotten in an instant. It's a small clay pot, no bigger than your thumb, sealed with beeswax. She never opens it in the light. She never opens it in public, because what's inside isn't for life. It's for when life has become a greater horror than death. You follow her gaze across the smoky longhouse, past the sleeping dogs and the children huddled by the central fire. It lands on Leaf, who sits propped in the corner. He came back from the raids a moon ago. He came back with both his arms, both his legs, and his famous red beard still intact. You feel the rough grain scrape against your palm, a splinter of reality in a sea of lies. The Jarl dismisses it as the cost of travel, a necessary evil for the glory that awaits, for the silver that will fill his coffers. And in that moment, the centuries collapse. You understand a chilling, universal truth. The Jarl's justification is no different from how the chieftains of the future will operate. The men in their high towers of glass and steel. A shadow falls over you. You look up into the face of Sigrid, the Jarl's wife. Her eyes, pale as a winter sky, hold no warmth. "The rats are bold today," she says, her voice as smooth and cold as a river stone. "Our Jarl will set traps." It is not a suggestion. It is a verdict. She is telling you to forget what you've heard, to accept the lie. Her hand rests on a small pouch at her belt, and for a moment, you hear the dry, rattling click of bones or runes inside. Today, we might give it a name like post-traumatic stress disorder, a ghost in the machine of the mind, triggered by the unspeakable. But here, in your time, it is simply a demon that lives in your blood, waiting for the sea to call it out. The thudding below stops. The silence that follows is heavy, expectant. You hold your breath, listening. You know what this means. Your father's fate is not a warning, it is a prophecy. The saga they sing of him is the lie. The man in the cellar is the truth. When you returned, you saw the shaking sickness in one of your own, an old woman, a village elder, her hands trembling so badly she could no longer weave. You remembered the monk's words. You found the plants growing in the damp shade near the creek. You cursed them, the scent of green hope rising in the air. But as you tried to help her, the shaman saw. He didn't see an act of mercy. He saw a threat. His power, his entire position beside the Jarl, is built on fear and hopeless devotion. It's the wet, hacking cough that you try to suppress right now. A sound you hear echoed softly, desperately, from the shadowed corners of the hall. The air itself tastes of stale sweat and fear. But the Jarl speaks only of enemies across the sea, of their fat monasteries and weak defenses. He is building a beautiful new story to paper over a terrifying old one. He is offering a glorious death on a distant shore to distract from the quiet, undignified death that is already creeping through your homes. This is the secret that history books never teach. Beside you, Kettle is holding court. He is a mountain of a man, his beard a spill of braided rust and silver, his arms scarred with the stories of a dozen raids. He is what you want to be, fearless, loud, alive. His laughter booms over the creak of the hull and the rhythmic groan of the oars. He's in the middle of a story about a burning monastery in Northumbria, his eyes alight with the memory of gold and glory. The other men lean in, their faces slick with sea mist, captivated. You are captivated. This is it. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts, seem to look through you, into the soft tissue of your brain. The real prophecy is for you alone. Her whisper isn't for the gods, it's for the dying. It's a dry, rasping sound, a scrape of brittle leaves against the damp wool of your tunic. An ASMR trigger for pure dread. She doesn't speak of the world serpent. She leans closer, her breath smelling of smoke and decay, and she whispers of a different creature. A hogormer, a mindworm. The healer's hands are stained with the earth. Everyone in your longhouse trusts those hands. You've seen them pack a deep gash with moss and yarrow to staunch the bleeding. You've seen them grind willow bark into a bitter paste that steals the fire from a fever. Her leather pouch, worn soft as a second skin, smells of life, of crushed leaves and dried roots and the clean scent of birch. But what you don't know, what 99% of your people will never know, is what she carries at the very bottom of that pouch. In the deep, forgotten latrine pits of your ancestors, they found the evidence. Parasite loads so heavy, gut flora so ravaged, it paints a picture not of mighty warriors, but of a chronically ill population. Scurvy that loosens your teeth, dysentery that turns your courage to water, and worms that steal the strength from your limbs. This is the truth that lurks beneath the epic poems. You grip the intricately carved dragon head on the rail, its wooden eye staring blindly at the gray waves. The air from the slit smells of mold, stale mead, and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood. You press your ear to the cold stone. The scraping is louder now, punctuated by a low guttural moan. It's the sound of a trapped animal. This is what history never records, not the glorious charge, but the quiet, desperate moments of decay that fuel it. It's a feeling a modern office worker might recognize, the low hum of anxiety from a system you know is broken, but which everyone pretends is fine. You're being gaslit by an entire civilization. You see a coffin. This paralysis that seizes you when the salt spray hits your face isn't cowardice. It's a premonition. It is the primal screaming instinct of a man staring down the barrel of his own genetic code. Just as some families are prone to weak hearts or clouded eyes, yours is prone to a mind that unravels under the unique horror of the raid. The endless rocking of the ship, the screams, the blood, the things a man is forced to do and see. 99% of people believe the church was the sole keeper of knowledge, but they don't understand it was also its greatest censor, burying any truth that didn't lead directly back to its own power. This herbal remedy, he explained, contradicted the doctrine of divine punishment. If a sickness could be managed, it wasn't a curse from God. It was just a flaw in the flesh. And a flaw in the flesh doesn't require a priest. It requires a healer. For too long, we have listened to whispers of weakness. His voice booms, a finely tuned instrument of power. We have been told our faith is thin, that foreign gods send curses on the wind. He's a master. He doesn't deny the problem. He rebrands it. You clench your fists, your knuckles white. You know what he's hiding. It's not a curse. It's the rot in the grain stores from the wet autumn. It's the strange fever that took 3 children from the weaver's hut last week. Their bodies burned in secret before the sun rose. The sagas they sing in the great hall are a lie. They tell you to fear the storm, the Saxon axe, the serpent in the deep. They never tell you that the most terrifying thing on the ocean is the man laughing beside you. You are on your first voyage, and the salt spray feels like a baptism into a new life. The longship cuts through the gray water, the beast of tarred wood and straining muscle. The air is thick with the smell of wet wool, unwashed men, and the endless, clean scent of the sea. They have just heard the public prophecy, the grand theater of the vulva. They heard of Fenrir, the great wolf, straining at his chains. They heard of Jormungandr, the world serpent, churning the sea in its rage. They heard of the glorious, bloody end at Ragnarok, a fitting death for warriors. But you are not with them. You are one of the chosen few, ushered into the darkness after the performance. The vulva, the seeress, sits on a pile of furs, her face a roadmap of wrinkles in the flickering light. He isn't watching the ship disappear with pride. His gaze is sweeping over the rest of you left on the shore. He is not a leader mourning the departure of his warriors. He is a farmer inspecting his livestock, calculating who is fit, who is fertile, and who will be on the next boat. And in his eyes, you see the chilling certainty that the next cull is already being planned. What 99% of people will never know, what the skalds will never sing about in their glorious sagas, is the invisible passenger already on board. They don't want you to know that the true horror of the Viking Age isn't a berserker's axe, but the silent war being waged in your own intestines. Recent forensic analysis, a magic for a future you can't imagine, has confirmed this hidden reality. Its dragon-headed prow looms over the village, a symbol of power and conquest. But 99% of people don't know what you know. These symbols aren't just for intimidation. They're designed to be so loud, so glorious, that they deafen you to the secrets they keep. The door is barred, but you know of another way to listen. Around the back, where the wall is made of rough-hewn timber and packed earth, a small ventilation slit sits near the ground, covered by a loose stone. You crouch, the damp soil seeping into the knees of your woolen trousers. And your uncle, who returned from a raid in the west and spent his last year staring into the fire, whispering to men who weren't there. In your grandfather, who they said simply wandered into the snow. It is a rot in the roots of your family tree, passed down from father to son, like the silver ring on your finger. This is the hidden truth behind your fear of the sea. The other boys your age boast of the raids to come, of the glory and the silver. When they look at a longship, they see adventure. A word worth more than all the silver in Christendom. You took the monk. The others mocked you, calling him your Christian pet. But in the long, dark nights on the journey home, you didn't force his faith from him. You forced his knowledge. He told you the formula was an old one, passed down in secret, a piece of wisdom the church itself was beginning to suppress. The lie is always wrapped in something beautiful. 99% of your people see only the silver glinting in the torchlight. But you see the sickness it's meant to hide. The Jarl stands on the feasting platform, his shadow a giant against the smoke-stained timbers of the longhouse. He holds up a silver arm ring, thick as your thumb and heavy with the promise of glory. The firelight licks its etched surface, and a collective sigh of awe ripples through the assembled village. It is a perfect, shining thing, a perfect, shining lie. And now you feel a strange coldness spreading from your gut, a coldness that has nothing to do with the sea air. A question burns in your mind, more terrifying than any storm. Is it already inside you? The church didn't fear the old woman because she spoke of pagan gods. They feared her because she knew a medical truth so terrifying, they had to bury it under centuries of prayer and propaganda. The air inside the seeress's tent is a physical weight. It's thick with the suffocating heat of the central fire pit and the acrid, nose-burning smoke of herbs you can't name. Sage, perhaps, and something bitter like nightshade. Outside, the longhouse rings with the boasts of the Jarl's men, their voices muffled by the stretched leather walls that seem to sweat in the gloom. You clench your jaw until you can taste the metallic tang of blood on your tongue. You know they are not going to conquer anything. They are being discarded. The true purpose of the raid isn't to vanquish others, it's to control you. As the longship becomes a fragile silhouette against the churning sea, you feel a profound, silent shift in your world. The stories are broken. The gods feel distant. The entire structure of your life reveals itself to be a cage. You dare to turn your head, just for a second, and look back at the Jarl. You try to place it, and then a memory surfaces, cold and sharp. Your neighbor, Halfdan, after his last voyage. He didn't come back with treasure, only a gray pallor and this same smell, which followed him from his cot to the stone-walled cellar where he wasted away, a prison of his own making. The Jarl called it the seasickness, but this isn't the kind that passes when your feet find land. This is the kind that stays, a dark seed planted in a man's gut, a festering that hollows you out from the inside. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 872. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. But be warned, some truths about the past are harder to forget than others. The sound must stop. You can feel it vibrating through the soles of your thin leather shoes, a rotten hum that lives in your teeth. You walk towards the Jarl's longhouse, the source of the noise. Thump, the steady, rhythmic, wet thud of his head striking the wall. What they don't want you to know is that this isn't an illness you can catch. It is an illness you inherit. 99% of people believe the sea madness is a curse from the gods, a weakness of spirit in men who cannot handle the whale road. The Jarls encourage this belief. It isolates the victims, makes it their own failing, their own shame. But you have seen it before. You watched, hidden by a crumbling wall, as he ground a poultice of plants you'd never seen, his movements precise and calm. You heard the wet, fibrous crunch of the leaves between his fingers, a sound of quiet competence in a world of screaming chaos. He applied it to the shaking man's temples and neck. He whispered to him, not a prayer, but a simple assurance. "This will not drive the worm out," he'd said to the man, "but it will quiet its gnawing. It will give you peace for a time." Peace. The greatest secret of the Vikings isn't how they fought, it's how they suffered. And the greatest crime of the church wasn't the gold the Vikings stole, but the truth they buried. The question that should keep you awake tonight is not what happened at Lindisfarne, but how many other inconvenient truths are still sealed away in the vaults of history, waiting for someone to dare to read them. So they chose the secret. They chose to bury the knowledge, to let the myth of strength endure, even as the men and women who embodied it wasted away from the inside out. You look at the barrel of salted food, the Jarl's special cask sitting beside it. The savory smell that once made your mouth water is gone. In its place is a phantom stench, a ghost on the wind that only you seem to notice. The smell of rot. The smell of a beautiful, terrible, and necessary lie. You've eaten the delicacy. You've accepted the honor. You can almost taste the metallic tang of fear on your tongue. The secret isn't just in a Viking grave on a distant island. It's a terrifying possibility sleeping in the soil beneath your own feet. You are standing on a graveyard of mislabeled bones, and the same forbidden story is trying to claw its way to the surface, right here, right now. The rain falls harder, and you realize the whispers you hear are not just the wind, but the warnings of the dead, begging you to finally understand what truly killed them. You can hear it now, the wet, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the oars hitting the water, a sound like a dozen fading heartbeats. It is the sound of social hygiene. You were told you must fear the Christian God and his armies, but the fear that truly grips your village isn't of foreign prayers, it's of your own neighbors. It's the fear of a bad harvest, of a lingering cough, of being seen as disposable. You look at the men being rowed away, their faces a mixture of bravado and terror. They believe they are going to conquer. They tell you the long shit smells of victory, of salt spray, sharp pine tar, and the oiled leather of your shield. It's the first lie they feed you, a beautiful story for boys who dream of becoming men. But as your bare foot touches the damp deck, another scent coils into your nostrils, a secret only the initiated recognize. It's not the clean scent of the sea. It's a sweet, sick, cloying odor, like honey left to rot in a bladder, a ghost of soured milk that clings to the very timbers of the boat. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This central conspiracy, this glorious narrative hiding a devastating reality, is the air you breathe. They tell you the sea is a path to glory, a gift from Odin. But you know what it really is, a liquid conveyor belt for a curse. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and the forgotten lives behind the legends, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. A week ago, he was a hero, the man whose saga is told around the winter fires, the man who taught you the heft and balance of a sword. Now, he is a secret. Your mother, her face a mask of brittle ice, told the neighbors it's a lung fever. But what you hear is not the wet rattle of a cough. It is a low, guttural moan, a sound stripped of all language, all humanity. And then there is the other noise, the one that makes the spit in your mouth taste like metal. Thump, a pause. It started on the Irish coast, in the smoke and chaos of the last raid. While the others hauled out silver chalices and screaming captives, you found something else. You saw him in the ruins of his scriptorium, a small, quiet man with ink-stained fingers, not fighting, not running, but tending to another prisoner. The man was convulsing, his limbs jerking with the shaking sickness, foam on his lips. Your shaman would have called it a demon, a worm sent by Loki to feast on the mind and prescribed a useless chant. But this monk, he did something different. Worse, it's dangerous. It creates pity where there should be hatred. It makes the enemy human. It's the same tactic used in every conflict since the dawn of time. You dehumanize the other side. You strip them of their weakness, their sickness, their humanity, and paint them as a singular, monstrous evil. That torn-out page from your forgotten book proves that the victims saw the truth of their attacker's condition, even as their own leaders were building a lie that would last for 1,000 years. Your quiet act of medical documentation becomes a conspiracy. The seabird, a staple of your people's diet, a symbol of their mastery over the unforgiving north, is a primary carrier for a wasting sickness they have no name for. They had to know. Someone, somewhere, connected the sickness to the honored food. But to announce it? To declare that the very thing that defines your clan's wealth and survival is killing you? It would be a truth that would shatter your world more completely than any enemy army. It would mean the long, slow death of starvation instead of the long, slow death of disease. You look at Old Man Hemming, shuffling past with his empty wood basket, his back bent into a permanent question mark, his joints so swollen he cries out with every step. The village healer says it's a dampness in his bones from a long, hard life. But what if it isn't? What if it's the echo of something ancient? A sickness not of the body, but in the body's very framework. You drag the toe of your shoe through the mud, exposing a shard of old pottery and a splinter of bone. Maybe animal, maybe human. Modern statistical analysis of Viking Age silver hoards reveals a dark truth the poets were paid to obscure. The wealth distribution never improved the lives of average farmers. The silver didn't buy new tools, better grain, or stronger homes for the village. It flowed in one direction only, up. It massively consolidated the Jarl's power, making them untouchable. This is the medieval blueprint for the Forever War, a brutal tactic used by powers across time to funnel public resources into the hands of the elite and distract a hungry populace with the phantom of a foreign threat. But you are smiling, shouting stories of glory to the younger boys. Your voice, just another part of the beautiful, necessary, world-ending lie. The morning air bites your skin, sharp with the North Sea wind and the tang of wood smoke. It's a familiar pain, a comforting one. But beneath the clang of the smith's hammer, another sound worms its way into your hearing. A rhythmic, wet scraping from the cellar of the longhouse next door. Your elders dismiss it as rats, but you know the truth. It's the sound of a man, once a legendary raider, trying to claw his way through the stone floor with what's left of his fingernails. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. The scraping sound from Gunnar's longhouse next door has finally stopped. For 3 nights, it was the sound of a shovel on a frozen earth, a desperate, frantic noise that spoke of a secret burial. Now, there is only silence, and the silence is a scream. But tonight, a new sound begins, one that is closer, deeper, and infinitely more terrifying. It comes from directly beneath your own feet. You press your ear to the rough-hewn floorboards, the splinters digging into your cheek. Below, in the damp, root-choked dark of your family's cellar, is your father. The Jarl had you flogged for a handful of crushed green leaves. Not for theft, not for cowardice, but for hope. You can still feel the ghost of the leather biting into your back, each stripe a searing lesson in the price of forbidden knowledge. The real pain, though, isn't in your scars. It's the memory of the monk's face, calm and accepting, as they dragged him to the chopping block. He died for a secret that now burns inside you, a cure that is also a curse. You are a physician of the soul, but in this moment, you are a physician of the body. You are a witness, and what they don't want you to know is that your clinical observation is a death sentence for the most powerful propaganda machine in the world. The church needs monsters to justify its power, to rally kings and peasants to its cause. Demonic invaders from the north? That's a story you can build a crusade on. But diseased, pathetic invaders? Men whose bodies were betraying them even before the battle began? That truth is useless. A strong warrior from the last raid now coughs a wet, hollow sound into his fist. A shield maiden, whose arms were once like banded iron, seems thinner, her skin taking on a pale, waxy sheen. They blame it on ill humors, on curses from the Christians, on a weakness in the bloodline. But you see the pattern. It's the ones who are honored the most, the ones who sit closest to the jarl, the ones who receive the lion's share of the preserved birds. New archaeological evidence, cross-referenced with half-forgotten lines in the sagas, points to this hidden vector. But truth is buried because it threatens a profitable narrative, whether it's a pharmaceutical company hiding a study about a drug's deadly side effects, or a university hiding a discovery that unravels the history they've built their reputations on. The evidence of a widespread, degenerative neurological disease, a thing that melts the bones from the inside out, has been sitting in museum basements for 50 years, deliberately mislabeled as malnutrition. You feel a tremor of understanding, a cold dread that has nothing to do with the rain. The Jarl doesn't need more silver. He has chests of it. What he needs is to get the young, the restless, the potentially sick men out of the village before they start demanding a bigger share of the last raid. Or worse, before their sickness spreads. The sagas, the ones they seal in memory as historical fact, are nothing more than beautifully crafted propaganda. What 99% of people who romanticize this age will never learn is the secret buried with the treasure. Your final choice is not between good and evil, but between two different kinds of death. You look at Eric, clawing at the stone. You look at the Jarl, a king presiding over a hidden graveyard. Then you look out, through the ventilation slit, at the sea. It calls to you, not with the promise of adventure, but with the cold, pragmatic necessity of survival. Your final haunting image is of yourself, weeks later, standing on the prow of a dragon ship. The salt spray hits your face. You hate the sea. 99% of people believe the Viking Age was defined by glory, gods, and gold. This is a carefully constructed lie. It's a story told by the powerful to hide a terrifying truth. The Great Viking Expansion wasn't fueled by courage, but by a desperate flight from a horror they couldn't name. A creeping sickness that rotted a warrior from the inside out. A secret the Jarls buried for over 1,000 years. You are Bjorn, and you are one of the few who knows.